Class GH alcoholic beverage license for Youngblood Coffee Roasters, doing business as Youngblood Coffee Roasters, to be located at 623 Second Avenue North. Steve?
Well, good afternoon, commissioners and board members. And Lydia, I apologize for misspelling your name. So the first application today is for Youngblood Coffee. It is a GH, which is a beer and wine. The food sales must exceed the alcohol sales. And there is to be only table service, table or booth, no bar in the facility. So there's, on the background check, there's one applicant, and there were just some misunderstandings, I guess I would say, with child support from moving from one state to another. And otherwise, there were no issues in there that would, cause us to recommend a denial of the license.
Very good. Are there any other comments or questions? Or I don't know if the applicant is here and wishes to speak. They sure can step up. Otherwise, any other comments or questions? And we will, Steve, did you have anything else to add? Otherwise, we'll accept a motion.
I'll move.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Okay, 2B, application for a Class A Club alcoholic beverage license for Touchmark at Harwood Groves LLC, doing business as Touchmark at Harwood Groves, to be located at 1200 Harwood Drive South. Steve?
This one's a little bit unique. So we don't issue a lot of club licenses. The club license are issued to clubs that have 200 members and have been in existence for 20 or more years, at least 200 members. And they're organized for civic, fraternal, or social or business purposes. There's also a sports, promotional sports in there too as another option for the club. The intention here is to offer an amenity at Touchmark that other long care facilities maybe wouldn't have, to also have their members be able to stay on premise rather than going out driving around, that type of thing. They currently have a Class F license, which is a full alcohol license, as is the club license, and the F requires them to have food sales, and so they meet that naturally. In conversations with the applicants, what they really were looking for was that physical bar setting, and so we talked about a number of different options, and actually came up with this as an option or an alternative. The background check looks very clean. No issues that we saw.
Steve, can I ask a question? So is this for the residents of that only, or can the public go there? How does that work?
Well, that's going to be a business decision, but primarily they're looking at for their residents. So, some of the club licenses that are issued, when you're thinking of a club, you're probably thinking of the AMVETS or the VFW or something like that. Other ones that maybe are a little bit different that are like the Stage at Island Park has a club license. And on the sports side, the curling club has a club license, or the golf course, the country club. So, and some of those are restricted just to the members, and other ones are open to the public. So it does become kind of a management decision, but that's not their intention to run a bar. Their intention is to have an amenity for their guests.
Okay, one more question then.
Sure.
Is it a license? How much does it cost, and will it be theirs? How will that work?
Well, no licenses issued after 2014 are, a physical property. So they all would, if they were to close up and decide, we're not going to be a club anymore, that license would come back to the city. As to the cost, that's kind of an interesting thing. There is no cost, no initial fee to a club. So they do get an advantage over, a typical bar that has to pay over $100,000 for a license.
So one more question then, is it an ongoing fee, or is there no fee ever?
Yes, there's the annual renewal fee is the same as any A license. So that's the $2,000 a year.
Any other comments or questions? Go ahead, Robert.
Yeah, is there a bartender on staff all the time, or?
Yes, they will, anytime that the bar is in operations, they will meet all the requirements of any other bar. They would have to have the server training, and all of that would be applicable.
So the members don't have access to the,
No,
are
Just-
there any other similar?
not in the care facilities like this. This is, it seems like that industry is always trying to outdo the other one on amenities, whether it's a pool or, fitness things or whatever. We'll see if this becomes a trend. The 20 years, they have to been in existence for a long time. And then the 200 plus, that's quite a sizable facility, so.
So Steve, let me ask, so there's a Bethany also has a similar type of home, and they have the same type of thing. So do they have a different license, or they just haven't been in existence long enough? Or maybe I'm asking the wrong question.
No, I don't, well, to my knowledge, Bethany does not have a liquor license.
So then, well, I can speak from experience. My mother was there, and so they did have a bar type area, but it was the residents' own alcohol. So then do they not need a license? I guess that's my question.
We'd have to look into that, how they
Okay.
run it, how they're doing that.
Okay, I apologize, because when my mother went there, I volunteered to stay with her because I thought it was about the coolest amenity. That she wasn't too happy about it, but I thought it was pretty cool. All right, I apologize for the editorial comment. Any other comments or questions? Otherwise, we'll accept a motion.
I make the motion?
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Motion and a second. Any further comments or questions? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Very good, thank you. Agenda item number 3, liquor license density report. Robin, if you would come on up and introduce yourself, and we look forward to your information.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the Liquor Control Board. My name is Robin Lidke-Sal. I'm a trained substance abuse prevention specialist with Fargo Cass Public Health, and I'm going to talk today about alcohol outlet density. I'm going to define what it is, identify problems with high alcohol outlet density, examine different types of regulation for alcohol outlet density, and review the alcohol outlet density here in our community. So what is alcohol outlet density? It is the concentration of retail alcohol establishments, including bars and restaurants, and liquor or package stores in a given geographic area. There are problems that can stem from high alcohol outlet density. It can lead to excessive alcohol consumption, serious health consequences, social consequences, violence, alcohol-impaired driving, neighborhood disruption, and public nuisance activities. Excessive alcohol consumption is a major public health problem, which is significantly affected by 2 major variables: physical availability and cost of alcoholic beverages. So today we're going to be addressing more of the physical availability of alcohol. Entertainment districts, as a prevention rule of thumb, are not necessarily recommended because areas with high concentrations of retail alcohol outlets, also known as clusters, are at a higher risk of excessive drinking and related harms due to the fact that there is increased access to alcohol in these areas. There is oftentimes price competition among the alcohol outlets in this area, for example, drink specials. There is patronage by non-residents, for example, people who travel to be in that area. And then there is the social aggregation of binge drinkers in a small geographic area. So for lack of better terms, a lot of intoxicated people in a very small area. So the Community Guide Task Force recommended that alcohol outlet density be regulated for preventing excessive alcohol consumption and related harms. The Community Guide is an evidence-based findings for population health, and it is based out of the CDC. They saw that it was an effective strategy for limiting the availability of alcohol, thus reducing excessive drinking, health consequences, and social consequences. There are different types of alcohol outlet density regulatory options. Here are just a few. The first would be geographic, and that is when you would limit the amount of alcohol outlets per specific area. So, for example, only 25 in the downtown area, for example. Now, this is helpful because it addresses overconsumption or overconcentration, in specific areas. There is also population level regulations, and that is limiting the amount of licenses per population. And Fargo, I believe at one time, or maybe still does actually, limit how many A licenses can be granted per every 10,000 people. There's also commercial regulation, and that is where they cap the percentage of alcohol outlets in relation to the total retail outlets in a geographic area. So for example, saying that only 25% of all retail outlets in a specific area, such as downtown, for example, can sell alcohol. This addresses clustering, and it also promotes retail diversity, and it is also helpful for neighborhoods where there are residents living, because more diversity is needed so that some of these other negative outcomes don't happen. Space is another restriction, and that restricts the location to protect sensitive land use areas. So for example, restricting the location of alcohol outlets away from schools, away from churches, away from a prison, things like that. Or space can also set a minimum distance between outlets. So for example, there needs to be 100 feet between each outlet. And then there is time. Time is not specific to density, but it can mitigate some of the density-related problems. And time would be limiting the hours of operation. So, for example, having alcohol outlets close by 10 or 11 p.m. has been shown to be very effective at mitigating some of the problems that we see in high-density areas. There are a number of resources available, so if you're interested in more information on this specific topic, like I said, the Community Guide does have information on it. The Community Guide Preventing Excessive Alcohol Consumption looks at all evidence-based interventions for communities. The second one there is Strategizer 55, and that actually is an action guide for how to regulate alcohol outlet density in a community. And then the CDC has put out a guide for measuring alcohol outlet density, which I might add is somewhat complex. And just a look at, obviously, one of the worst alcohol-related outcomes that we have in our community is death, whether that be death by a motor vehicle crash, death as a result of an alcohol-related injury, or death from a long-term alcohol use disorder such as cirrhosis of the liver, for example. This is a look at our alcohol-related deaths in Cass County, and this is data from our Cass County coroner. And it's important to note that almost every year, these deaths are higher than all other drugs combined. So alcohol probably always has been and probably always will be the #1 drug of concern in our community. So with taking alcohol outlet density in mind, we decided to do a small local assessment just to test some of the theories out there related to alcohol outlet density. So what we did is we compared number of establishments with how many people there were per establishment. And I should note this is 2018 assessment data, so things have changed quite a bit in our community since then. So this picture probably has gotten perhaps a little bit worse even than it was in 2018. So these graphs break down the community into 3 retail districts: downtown in dark blue, 13th Avenue in light blue, and then 45th Street in green. Now, if we take a look at the left, that shows the number of establishments in each one of those areas. If we take a look at the right, it shows the number of persons residing in each of those areas. And if we take a look at those retail areas, The number of establishments per person is much greater in downtown and 13th Avenue and 45th Street than it is in all of Fargo. So in all of Fargo, there is one liquor establishment for every 632 persons. If we take a look at downtown, there's one alcohol establishment for every 95 persons who resides downtown. And I want to make a note here. The last time that we were able to actually pare down population by neighborhood was with the 2010 census data. That's the data that we're using because that is the only year that it was available. We are anticipating that this data will be available again with the 2020 census data. But back in 2010, there were 4,005 residents downtown, roughly 3,800 on the 13th Avenue area, and roughly 3,200 in the 45th Street areas that we looked at for the number of alcohol establishments. We also took a look at square miles because there's a number of different ways that we can assess or we can measure this. So we took a look at how large is the area. So downtown, the location that we zeroed in on for downtown was 0.24 square miles. The area for 13th Avenue was 1.53 miles, and the area for 45th Street South was 1.11 square miles. Now, if we take a look at on the right, the number of establishments per area, we see that downtown had 42 establishments in a 0.24 square mile area. 13th Avenue had 29 establishments in a 1.53 square mile area. And 45th Street had 36 establishments in a 1.11 area. So all of these slides are showing that in areas of our city that we definitely have a very high alcohol outlet density. And in fact, Fargo itself has a very high alcohol outlet density. Anything that is less than one establishment per 1,000, or that has more than one establishment for 1,000 people is considered high. And we had one establishment for every 600 people as opposed to that higher number of 1,000. Now, we took a look at different incidents. We took Fargo Police Department data and looked at different types of incidents to see how they may or may not correlate with the different locations. And again, we took data from 2017 to 2018. It was a 6-month period from September of 2017 to March of 2018. And again, we took a look at these 3 distinct retail areas, and we took a look by time of day and time of the week to see how many property incidents there were in these areas. And I would like to note that the 13th Avenue property incidents are primarily tied to one retail location. I'm not going to mention that, to zero that, to highlight that particular retail location, but a large portion of those were tied to just one retail location that does not sell alcohol. Okay, so this just takes a look, and as we can see in the downtown area, property incidents were pretty standard, throughout the time of day, throughout the day of the week. There were some fluctuations with 13th Avenue, and there also were some fluctuations with the 45th Street area as well. And I couldn't personally say whether or not this is considered high or not. Perhaps someone from the police department could say, yeah, 145 is really high for that amount, of time. But again, this is back in 2017, 2018. I think our world and our community has changed a lot since then. So I think this data probably would look a little bit different. Now, if we take a look at violent incidents, again, from the same time period, again, breaking them down by those retail areas and breaking them down by the days of the week and the times of the day, it shows how many violent incidents there were. And if you, another note here for the light blue numbers, the 13th Avenue violent incidents were again all tied to one retail location that does not sell alcohol. So 2 per bar that you see there were tied to that one location that does not sell alcohol. So you probably could subtract 2 from the light blue. But I think probably what sticks out the most here in this depiction is that Thursday through Saturday from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m., we had 23 violent incidents in a 0.24 square mile area with 4,000 residents living there. So that kind of does go towards our theory that if you have a higher alcohol outlet density, you will have higher violent incidents. This is a look at quality of life incidents. And, again, it's kind of hard to interpret, exactly what we're seeing here, but we did want to measure and take a look. And we did see, again, a slight increase if we looked at downtown area. Again, Thursday through Saturday, 6 p.m. to 6 a.m., there were 53 of those incidents, versus 38, which was the other highest time in that location. The 13th Avenue location shows a lot of quality of life incidents, and I'm not really sure how to explain that. I would like to say that it's a more residential area, but we did look at those population numbers, and they were about the same back in 2010. Now, we probably have had quite a bit of growth residentially, perhaps in that area since 2010 to account for some of that. And then this is just a look at total incidents, again, during the same 6-month time period. And again, those 3 distinct retail areas, and again, the days of the week and the times of the day. And that was just all total incidents, and I would say that would be all probably calls for service that we see there. I'm somewhat confused by okay, so it looks like quality of life and total incidents looks like is the exact same data. So, yep. So maybe everything falls into quality of life, or else I got my slides wrong. I'm not quite sure which one. I apologize. So in summary, high alcohol density leads to excessive consumption and serious health and social consequences. Fargo has high alcohol density and associated consequences. But the regulation of alcohol outlet density can lower excessive consumption and reduce health and social consequences. And there are plenty of regulatory options, as well as a community action guide to help guide us through that process if we choose to take it. And I would also like to note that there are dozens of prevention strategies for excessive alcohol consumption. This is merely one of them, but there are dozens, and I would be happy to, present information on any of those others at any point in time if you are interested in that. And at this time, I would just, I have 2 more things I'd like to say. First is that I think everybody probably knows, but if you don't, North Dakota and Fargo do have the highest binge drinking rates in the nation and have for many, many years. So we definitely have a problem here. And then the last thing that I wanted to say is, I'll open up for questions, and thank you very much for allowing me to present today.
So I have a couple of questions to start out, and obviously everybody, I'm sure, has some. But the first one is, what kind of licenses? Did you look at all licenses? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, exactly. We looked at all, because when we looked at the literature for how to assess alcohol outlet density, it says to count all of them, whether they're a grocery store, which we don't have any, but any place that sells alcohol. So yes, it is every place with a liquor license, so all 200 and some.
Why, and I do think this is great and great information, and I think it's a baseline for hopefully going forward to hopefully we'll be able to learn from the trends. I guess my other question is, so obviously there was a new census, and obviously that's been slowed down a little bit. So will you have new numbers eventually for this, and can you bring those to us when you get those? Because I do believe that downtown, the population compared to 2010 is drastically different. And so I think it'd be interesting to show those. So can you talk about that?
Yes, I would be happy to update this as soon as we have new census data. And I could also work with the police department again to look at, 2020 and 2021 data as well.
And I do appreciate that, but some of the numbers for me are a little bit overwhelming. And so I think it's going to take more than one time to go through this for me to digest it. So that's my own perspective. But any other comments or questions? Go ahead.
I really appreciate this, Robin. And I would really like to have your PowerPoint presentation in my email box so I can review the resources. I'm probably coming from a different perspective than the rest of our commission here because I am a downtown resident. And I know that downtown is an entertainment capital of North Dakota, but I also want to remind people that it's a neighborhood. And I live in this neighborhood along with thousands of others. And I want to make that point that quality of life is an issue. I'm also on the Downtown Neighborhood Association. I represent those folks too, and that's one of the top concerns that comes out when we ask them for feedback is that they have concerns for safety. So again, I really appreciate this, and I would really look forward to visiting with you on other strategies because it's really important, and I signed up for this job to do something about it. So I want to be talking with you.
Great, thank you.
That's awesome. Go ahead.
I just got a question kind of on the statistics, the 0.24 square mile area for downtown and the number of residents. So I've been a North Sider all my life, and downtown is our entertainment district. My little brother's way down in South Fargo, and they think they have to pack a sandwich to go downtown. So how did you come up with, what the population is? And it seems to me as though we've got a very small land piece and a very small population for downtown, when in fact, I think a lot of downtown is used by much of the city.
So when you do this assessment, you can, pick, which area you want. And there are, and I have to say, the assessment is complicated, and there's many different ways that it can be done. And there are pros and cons to every way that it's done, as well as there are pros and cons to each of the different ways that you can regulate density. So for this particular assessment, we just picked arbitrarily what we thought in our minds as public health department staff constituted downtown. And so we really zeroed in on what we felt was that, entertainment district, if you will.
Any other comments or questions? And I do think, obviously, the police chief, you can learn a lot from this too, because obviously, public safety, the city has invested a lot of money in the downtown, and so we want it to be safe, because if it isn't safe, people aren't going to want to come down here. So I do think it's a priority for all of us, and I do think these numbers are beneficial, whether you and how we use them, and I do think this is a good baseline, and hopefully we can learn from this and keep improving as time goes by. Any other comments or questions? Lydia, I apologize if you're on the line and have a question, please go ahead.
Oh, thanks, Dave. I did have one question. I was curious if you incorporated information for the square miles that you calculated for each zone or region that you looked at. Did you incorporate zoning information, like how much of that space is commercial versus residential?
No, that could be done, and this, I guess, brings it back to the fact that this is a very introductory level assessment and presentation and snapshot of alcohol outlet density. It is a lot more complicated than what I'm showing you here. And Lydia brings up a good point that there's so many different ways to assess it, to look at it. Luckily, there is a guide, and I think that, if we really wanted to go all out on this, probably hiring a consultant really would be the best way to measure this, other than having, myself, who's not a math major, doing it.
I do think the other issue is, so it isn't just Fargo, the downtown isn't the entertainment district for Fargo or for this, it's regional. A lot of people come here for the rest, and so you have to keep the balance of, we have people where it's their neighborhood and their home, but it's also an attraction where people travel a long ways. And so I think this is something obviously it's an issue, and I think this is a great start to at least bear in mind. And so thank you very much for all the information. And I would appreciate it if you could have that emailed to us, and then if I'm sure it'll be available online. So if anybody here at the meeting wants to review the numbers, they'll have the opportunity to do that too.
Yes, thank you again for allowing me to introduce you to this topic.
Great, thank you very much. And with that, if that's all right with everyone, we'll move on to our next agenda item. Number 4, request to modify the FA food sales requirements. Brent Edison with Vogel Law. Brent, go ahead.
Thank you. Yes, I'm Brent Edison from Vogel Law Firm. I represent North Star Hospitality LLC, which operates Southtown Poorhouse, a restaurant with an FA liquor license, and the shops at Osgood. With me in the second row is one of the owners of North Star Hospitality in Southtown, Chad Klemick, and I think Rick Archigo, another owner, is here as well. This is the third time I've been before this group, and I thank you again for the opportunity. Each time I have been here, I've seen pragmatism and flexibility by this group in terms of meeting the needs of businesses and having flexibility to be consistent with your mission, but also allow businesses to make it. And I think today may be a topper on that with the long-term care facility receiving the club license. So we're asking today, again, for flexibility. In my prior two appearances here, there was a receptive ear on the part of this group, and even talked about having a task force and things like that. I think I was first here in October, and the time has passed since then. We've had at least one discussion since then. But just quickly, and I know you got some police reports to consider, none of which are from Southtown Poorhouse, and I think you know that's not been a problem there. The FA license, as you know, requires at least 50% food sales as compared to alcohol sales. And I think the committee is aware that businesses have had difficulty going over and under that 50% threshold. And at least one that has had that problem in the past, recently closed their doors. I don't know if it's due to that or what, but and that's due to changing trends, as I pointed out before, that people are getting craft beers, designer cocktails, wine with their meal. Changing consumer preferences made it more difficult to meet that 50-50 requirement. So, and a little bit about Southtown Poorhouse has a high volume restaurant, and we've provided this board previously with a letter from U.S. Foods sales representative indicating that that account is number 3 on a list of 45 accounts for food sales. It's a high volume restaurant. It has it's regulated as a restaurant. It's got a kitchen with huge capacity. And also the kitchen is shared with Dwayne's House of Pizza. And I just bring this up real quickly because the background is there's a dispute between the Southtown Poorhouse and the city of Fargo on whether to include pizzas that are consumed on the premises, that are sold on the premises and by Dwayne's. So that's a dispute. There was an audit done. If you counted the Dwayne's pizzas, it passed the audit for the 50-50 ratio. If you excluded them, it failed the audit. So we have litigation pending about that. There will be a hearing on that, but that's a matter that could be resolved as well by means of the proposed ordinance that we have provided. What we have asked for is some flexibility and another way of determining that something's a bona fide restaurant. So you look at the 50-50 ratio, that serves that purpose, and we're adding in our proposed amended ordinance another way of determining if something is a bona fide restaurant, and that is $50,000 per month in food sales. And I guess there's nothing magic about that number, but we think that's a number that makes it very difficult to argue that this is a bona fide restaurant. So what our proposed ordinance and would be to change the FA and FARZ licenses to allow there to be either a 50-50 ratio as there is now, and leave that in the ordinance, but also say that licensee's gross revenue from the sale of food, if that's at least $50,000 per month, that would also meet the requirement, and that would be considered a bona fide restaurant in compliance with the FA license. So we'd ask for the kind of flexibility and pragmatism and cooperation, I guess, in resolving a dispute to adopt the amendment. And with that, I stand ready to answer any questions. Chad Klemick is here to answer questions as well.
Great, thank you. Do we have any questions? Go ahead.
Yeah, Mr. Edison, I believe it was last time you were here, you mentioned that your lease or the owner's lease required an FA license. Is that keeping you from talking to the city about perhaps getting a more appropriate license, as in an A license?
The answer to that is yes. So that's a reality that my client has.
Okay, so I would assume if I try to put myself in the landlord spot, it's because he wants this property to be more of a restaurant than a bar. And it's possible that you're this very successful and very nice business. I've been there several times myself. I mean, you walk into it, there's gambling machines, there's pool tables, there's dartboards, there's a big square bar in the middle. It feels like a bar. And there's people in this room that have, an old saying that if it looks like a bar, if it smells like a bar, it's a bar. So part of what's happened here to the FA licenses that were, and somebody correct me if they feel I'm wrong, but they were created for kind of overflow lounges for Fridays and Chili's. They were popular because at that time also the city of Fargo was very interested in adding food to as many liquor licenses as they could. So they kind of capped the A licenses. They wanted less honky-tonk, so to speak, and drinking places and more places where food was involved. That was certainly responsible for the times. So, I mean, your website, you call it a sports bar. So, I mean, is it what was originally meant with the FA licenses, or should this be an A, which might be limited, but I would question, is that something we should talk about, adding an A or opening an A? It's a beautiful business. I believe it's well-run. It seems very successful, very high volume. So does the FA fit that? And then my tag-along question would be, what do you say to the FA business that is a restaurant primarily? Maybe it's doesn't even have a bar, but it does serve alcohol, and their number is $45,000 a month. And that's the problem with not using a percentage in my mind, is that there's a fairness factor. Yes, 50,000 will work for you, and usually when in these type of things, the number that you pick will always work for you. Half the people are going to be either bigger and half the people are going to be smaller. So I think this is going to put a lot of stress on the city. How do you juggle this new paradigm? And is this fair, would be my question.
Well, there's a lot to unpack there. I guess, first of all, the concept, I think, was approved by the city and licensed, and it hasn't been an issue. The concerns you mentioned about it being an FA establishment, that has not been an issue. And part of what landed us here today is that the city of Fargo and Mr. Sprague knew that knew of the business plan and knew that the Dwayne's pizzas were going to be consumed on the premises, and so that's something they knew about at the time. Now, I think we got here because of competitors voicing their concerns. And the lease, I guess, is a result of there being also, a competing business that's subject to lease. And so, no, my client can't have an A license because of their lease requirement. Now, there's no perfect system that in terms of enforcement. I don't see this as a problem because the city gets to, issue FA licenses, and they can, decide who gets it and who doesn't get it. And all we're asking for is, I think, a very reasonable request to say that if you sell $50,000 worth of food a month, you're a restaurant. And that's in keeping with the FA license. It's not I think you described a honky-tonk or anything like that. This is a high-volume restaurant with a full menu. You've been there, you've seen that. You've looked at, the tables, everybody's ordering, the food's getting served. It's a restaurant. It has a problem. We're coming to the city with a problem that I think is able to be resolved by demonstrating the kind of flexibility that this group has shown to other businesses, and just resolve this dispute altogether in a way that I think is reasonable. Now, we put forth the $50,000 figure because we thought, well, it's hard to argue that that's not a restaurant. There's nothing magic about that figure, but there's, I guess in my 3 times here, there's been no other proposal put before this group, and I've not heard one from this group or from the city. So that's why we're putting it before the board today. And I don't know if that answers your question.
Well,
but
it does.
go ahead.
I mean, certainly in spirit, I'm not questioning the integrity of your business. Sometimes it's hard to write it when you talk about the business plan that Mr. Sprague originally saw. It's hard to pick your customers sometimes too. You evolve into other things. So I guess my question would be, which is really, for the board and for the city, is are we better off creating a transition license or that next version of A licenses or whatever? And yes, it might cost a little bit more, but there is a higher cost to higher liquor volume, and that the guy with the stars on his lapel, that's part of what he has to deal with as liquor sales rise. So rather than change the whole FA thing, which I think has worked and has made it easy for Fargo to expand a lot of restaurants without, in the old days, sorry, you can't have, somebody might open an Italian restaurant. Sorry, there are no liquor licenses or wine licenses. You'll have to wait. So that's my question. It's not asking about what you're asking for or the owners are asking for. I totally understand. And, I think liquor sales are easier to grow than food sales. There's a lot of ways to do that, but it can be very competitive price-wise, et cetera, too. So,
Steve, go ahead. And then if we have any questions, go ahead, Steve.
Well, first of all, Bob stole my thunder about the ancient history here. So, yeah, in the 90s, Chili's and Fridays came to the city, and that's how the FA license was created. It was just to be a holding area while people waited for their tables to be cleared and they could be seated. Originally, the FA license had a 65-35 split. And so the city was flexible and said, maybe we need to make an adjustment. Maybe we need to make that a 50-50. The industry also came to us and said, gee, we'd really like to add gambling, and so gambling is allowed. Maybe we should pull that back and not allow gambling. So like Bob says, so that we don't have, looks like, smells like, feels like is a bar type of thing. I think the city has been very flexible in the past. I don't want to get into trying the other item about whether or not they met their food sales. So I want to kind of coach my responses just very carefully here. But there are some aspects of the operation that had we not brought them forward to the ownership, I don't know that they would have changed. One of those was that they were closing their kitchen at 10 o'clock, which isn't a violation of the ordinance. They need to have their kitchen open till within 1 hour of the closing of the bar or the facility. So, and they made that change. But so when they were closing their kitchen at 10 o'clock, there were 4 hours a night where they were selling nothing but alcohol. So there were items in their operation that contributed to them not selling enough food. So the part of the ordinance that I want to read that I think is most important here, and the ownership group came in knowing exactly what the ordinance required, is 50% or more of your food sales. And the purpose of the FA license is to allow sales of alcoholic beverages as an adjunct to the restaurant operations. So at what point do alcohol sales, are they no longer adjunct? And I would say at 50-50, I mean, if you're selling half of your volume as food and half as alcohol, the city can't be any more liberal in that part, in my opinion. Because if they set the tag at 50,000 food sales, you're a restaurant, and we don't care how much alcohol you sell. So now if somebody sells 50,000 food and 150,000 of alcohol, that's clearly not going to be a restaurant. That's a bar. So the way the ordinance is set up with the penalty structure is their first failure of meeting that food, which we're going to hear at a different time. The penalty will be to close their operations 1 hour early, and you have 6 months to get your operation, make those adjustments in your business operation. I don't know if you have any other questions of staff.
I have a question, Steve. So the Class A licenses are, I think at one point they were based on population, and obviously the census, I don't know if we have the exact numbers, but are you anticipating that maybe there are going to be some availabilities? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so we capped the A, like Bob is saying, but what we did was we created a Z license. So the Z license is just like the A, does not require any food sales, and that does have a population trigger. So at every 10,000 people, we add an A license. I don't know what the population is going to be when that number comes out in August, but I've got to feel that, the way the city is growing up, we're going to be awfully close to another license being available.
I guess I got a question on the 50/50. I noticed that you mentioned Grand Forks is 40/60. What is West Fargo, or where does this 50/50 number become so magic? Because I do think that with the craft beers and, the $13 martinis, oftentimes it's, when you look at your bill at the end of the night, I don't know that it's always 50/50. Where does that magic 50/50 number come from?
So in North Dakota, every city sets up their own local governance of liquor licenses. So across, the way in West Fargo, they don't have all of these classes of licenses. They just have on sale, off sale, and very few classes. So they don't have something like this. The 50/50, it's my understanding the interpretation of that was to try to make some tie to state law, and the part of state law where it says when a minor can be present. And in both cases where a minor can be present where alcohol is, they're required to be a restaurant. In one case, it's if they're accompanied with their parents, then it really doesn't matter if the food sales exceed alcohol sales. In the other case, if you want to be able to have your 18, 19, 20-year-olds go into, say, an Applebee's or something like that, then the food sales have to exceed the alcohol sales. And that's where we came up with that 50/50. So if you think of an Applebee's type of situation, a college kid wants to go out with their friends and have a burger or something, then they can go into that restaurant where alcohol is served because their food sales exceed their alcohol sales.
Any other comments or questions? Lydia, I apologize if you have any questions, please go ahead.
My only questions, I appreciate Steve Bragg's comments about, the hours that the kitchen was open. And I was sitting here thinking, I'm curious, about what additional measures the business has taken to increase their food sales. And maybe you could speak to that, but I tend to, be a little, conservative about, should we change the whole rule, or does the business need to consider some alternative ways to increase their food sales? Could you speak to that issue at all?
Sure. This is Brent Edison. One of the ways under consideration was having, I guess we'll call it a Ruby Tuesdays kind of salad bar, and really promoting that. The onset of the pandemic has pretty much squashed that idea, but that's something that is under consideration and will be explored now that we're emerging from the pandemic. But that would be an example, along with other things considered, to increase the food number for purpose of the ratio. If I could just real quickly just respond to a couple of things Mr. Sprague said. First of all, if there are any issues, the closing hours, anything like that, that come up, we want to know about it, and we'll remedy those. So I think any issues have been remedied. Mm-hmm. I think Steve is nodding up and down, and so we would want to do that. And there's been a reference also to state law, and state law will be complied with in terms of minors or anything else, regardless of how this group acts on the proposal. So I guess with that, some real good comments and concerns have been addressed here. There's no perfect system. There isn't one, and our amendment isn't perfect either. But we'd ask that this group demonstrate the kind of flexibility they have had for other businesses in a spirit of making it work, and adopt the proposed amended ordinance.
Any other comments? Or go ahead.
I guess I have an issue with I feel like this is just a Band-Aid approach. I would like a more comprehensive approach to all of this. And I would be willing to lower to 40/60 or 45/55 if we had a comprehensive restructuring of what goes on. And I mean by that some enhanced server training, because we just heard about the license density and issues with that. I'd like to strengthen the penalty matrix. I would like cameras and scanners in all of the establishments. I would like to sit down with the rest of the business owners and let's problem solve and see what their ideas are for getting beyond the problems that your group is experiencing. I hesitate to lower that without having those stipulations in place. And again, I think this is just a Band-Aid approach, and I think we need to look more comprehensively at how we can do it and make it good for everybody. I'm all for businesses and success, but I'm also taking a hard look at the health and safety of our community members. And if we can't address the over-serving that's happening in our areas, then I can't accept reducing food sales and not having any limits at all on the alcohol. So that's where I'm coming from.
Those very good comments. Thank you very much. So Steve, can you talk about the Z license? Give me a timeline and just an estimate as do you think when that would happen?
The best estimates that we have at this time is that in late August, we will see a new census number. Personally, I'm anticipating seeing that number being over that 130,000 population trigger, which would increase the Z license and would also increase the B limited licenses, which is the off-sale license.
So if you don't mind, can we just make sure to put that on the agenda as soon as it's available? And obviously it will take some time, and then make sure that we contact them, because I do think that that's a solution. It might not be the solution that they care to take, but at least to me, they should at least be alerted as quickly as possible. And I don't know if anybody has any comments or questions. I think we've had good discussion. If anybody wants to make a proposal, now's the time. Otherwise, we can move on.
I would like to kind of ask Mr. Edison if you could talk to your landlord and he understood the point, and now you didn't have FA in your contract, would a Z or a A or whatever, would that be an option for you to consider?
Well, my perception of that is that I guess we'll call it the competitive environment with other, lessees would makes that impossible. If the lease could be changed, then another license would be, we would have done it before now. You can never say never, and we will explore all options in light of decision today, but
Sure.
that's the lay of the land as I see it today.
So I'm not sure I understand what the competitors are saying, that if the lease was up, there would be other people bidding for that spot.
No, I'm saying competitors demand that occupancy be restricted to an FA license.
I see.
Once again, if there's any comments or questions, otherwise, I think we've had our good discussion and we're going to move on. Unless somebody wants to make a motion. Steve, go ahead.
Yeah, Commissioner, since, as Mr. Edison noted, this is the third time that they've been in front of this group, and so they really do need a decision, kind of a yes or no, are we going to make this modification? And so we're really looking for a motion at this point, either to accept their proposal or a motion to deny their proposal.
Very good. So Steve has given us two options. We can either accept the motion or deny the motion. Do we have is anybody willing to make a motion?
I'll make the motion to deny it. Oops. I will make the motion to deny it at this time.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. All right, moving on. Number 5, Police Department Monthly Report. Chief Zabowski.
Hello, Board. So you've got to see today the first iteration of our new liquor establishment incident forms. And in your packets, you've got a number of different locations in which we were called for various incidents. Just to give you some perspective, items A through I are calls in which I'm not seeking any action or anything of that nature. They were calls in which we had cooperation or they properly notified police. Things happened at those establishments that had nothing to do with the operations of the tavern from their perspective and ours. For example, Amvets and Country and Suites who called because of over-intoxicated individuals requesting assistance from us to get them out or to give them proper service. To incidents at the Fort Knox, which were all outside of the business. One instance, a woman trying to break into the tavern after they properly locked up at closing time. The Northern had a couple of incidents in the parking lot, a theft and an assault. I'm going to talk a little bit about the Old Broadway, so I'll skip that one for now. Rooters called because they identified a person who tried to get in with a fake ID, seized that ID and called us so that we could collect it. And so those, unless there's any specific questions about items A through I, and I'll talk a little bit about Old Broadway. But anything before I do that?
Are there any questions for any of these issues? And can I just add real quick, I really appreciate this, and this is a new style, and so I appreciate you doing that, so thank you for doing that.
Yep, and just for for the Old Broadway situation, I think an incident that you would be interested in. I know many of us are aware that there's a video out there involving an altercation that happened outside of the tavern about a week or so ago. And the individual involved, we don't know who that is. We have publicly asked him to come forward if there's any type of criminal conduct that he wished to report. And we have not identified that person, nor has that person come forward. However, the management at the Old Broadway did reach out to us to report the incident after seeing the video so that we could do a little bit of investigation and get information from them as to what happened from their perspective. I think from that, that was a good thing for them to do, and I think this process is encouraging licensed premises to do what they can to maintain safety and work with us collectively to address some of these other issues. So if something new comes of that, we'll come back to the board with it. But at this point, I don't think there's anything more to do on that particular issue, unless there's a question.
Any questions? Otherwise, proceed.
Okay. Item J, the windbreak. I do have items that I would be recommending action on. However, due to notification issues, we'll have to pen that until the August 18 meeting. Again, as we kind of work through the new process, we're working on a couple of kinks, and we want to make sure that we give proper notice to owners who may have action taken against them by the board. So that'll come to you on August 18th.
So Steve, my question is, do we need to continue that? Do we need to take action, or will it just carry over to the next meeting?
It'll just carry over.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, and we'll make sure it's on the agenda for
Okay,
the next
thank
meeting
you.
as well. Gorka Palace, so this is kind of an interesting situation. On July 4th, our officers, it was brought to our officers' attention that there was some type of after-hours liquor party going on inside the Gorka Palace at 1045th Street South. Now, the Gorka Palace is a restaurant bar that is not currently open as a restaurant bar, and we found out later it's not even licensed as a licensed establishment anymore. The liquor licenses and so forth are not active. However, as the officers went over there, they observed that there was a lot of cars parked in the parking lot, and this is at 2:11 in the morning. Large crowds, including people who were actually trying to get into the location. There was an individual acting as a bouncer at the door. One of the persons trying to enter was actually holding a carry-in bottle of liquor. And as we tried to make contact with this bouncer and identify what was going on, because officers could observe that there was alcohol inside the establishment and that many individuals were inside drinking inside of this otherwise closed commercial establishment. The bouncer refused, as did all of staff, refused to identify themselves. And at one point, an individual identifying himself as the manager, Kwame Omani, approached the officers and told them that he was the manager and that they had no right to enter and refused entry. As this was going on, there was multiple people going in and out, and eventually as the large group of estimated to be 50 to 75 people exited the facility, the officers were then allowed in. They could observe cups that looked and smelled of hard liquor, as well as beer, and we had beer bottle caps laying around the facility. So we have some photos of that, but it's not at this junction rather necessary. But I just wanted to bring that to your attention. There is no licensee, but because I think of the ongoing situation, I wanted to make you aware of that, basically kind of a receive and file for future reference.
Thank you. Any comments or questions about that? So
I'm sorry, I forgot to mention, there is we have referred the case to, it's been back and forth between the city attorney and state's attorney, but the city attorney now is going to pick up that case. And I'm not, no, I'll check with them, but Will Wisher has that, and it's indicated they'll be prosecuting that particular situation.
So I guess my question from the liquor license perspective is, so if they don't have a license, so who do you contact the owner of the property, or how is
Yeah.
that?
So we did contact the owner. So question one is we did contact the owner and asked him about this. He informed us that he had rented this facility to an individual so that they could have family parties. Nothing that was supposed to be alcohol related at all, because the owner said, I don't have a liquor license that they could use. Once inside, officers also observed hard liquor and things inside the facility, so someone brought that in. And in terms of the violation, selling or serving without a license is a Class A misdemeanor, which is why we referred it over to the state's attorney. But between the two prosecutorial offices, they've resolved to take it back on the city side and follow through on it.
But I guess my question is, so then, but the owner of the property, are they liable at all, or what's the situation there?
So they had some type of an agreement with this individual, so they weren't liable for their violations because it's not licensed in their name. And so they have canceled that agreement. So they're not, actually, no one's authorized to be there. I think there's a little bit of a civil dispute currently taking place regarding that, but we'll continue to monitor the facility to make sure that there's no illegal alcohol or things of that nature going on.
Very good. So from our perspective, you're just giving us information and then you'll just update us if there's any changes? There isn't really any action for that one either.
No, there's no
Okay.
action, really just information.
Okay, thank you.
And then the last item, I think also an informational file and receive piece. I'm sure, as you're aware, the hearing for the Africa nightclub occurred yesterday. Originally, it was scheduled for August 4th. This information was provided to the commission, and because of the timing change, you weren't able to be aware of it ahead of time, although, so again, I think with the commission action, this is more of just information to file and receive. But prior to your last meeting, the Liquor Control Board meeting on June 29th, there were 2 other incidents that occurred at the Africa nightclub that our officers were sent to. Obviously, you didn't have the information on the 29th as it filtered through the process here. But we were sent to a loud party there at 6:40 p.m. on the 27th of June. This was a citizen complaint due to the loud noise and music. And again, we talked with the owner, Francis Brown, about the noise ordinance once again, and they subsequently turned it down. And again, on June 28th at 2 a.m., officers, while monitoring the area, observed an incident in the parking lot, a male and yelling, another male holding it back. The owner or manager, Francis, was out there attempting to break this fight up, and officers assisted, and this individual was eventually left on his own volition. So just, again, information for the board to be aware of, but no additional action requested.
Thank you very much. And so the representatives of the Africa are here, and they asked me for permission to speak, and I thought it would be appropriate we're going to go through a background check, and when that's completed, then that's going to come back to us, and so then they'll have an opportunity then. And so I'm maybe they're not that happy about it, but I just, from the perspective, these were just kind of updates, and so this wasn't the time. So that was my reasoning behind that. They will have an opportunity. Like I said, we're doing some background, and then it will come back to liquor control, and then our recommendation will go on to the city commission. So that's just kind of an informational thing for everybody. Right. Anything else, Chief?
No, we're awaiting their application and background materials. So once we receive that, we can start on it, but we have not received that yet.
And basically, the commitment we made as a city commission was we'll try to expedite that. So as soon as we get information, then they run background checks, and then after that is completed, then it will come to us. And so that's kind of our perspective. Go ahead, Chief.
If all of the information is completed and submitted as pursuant to the commission's motion yesterday, we will expedite the process.
Very good. Any other comments or questions for the good of the order? Otherwise, it's 2:08. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Have a good afternoon. We are adjourned.